My name's Jason Pomeroy. I'm the founding principal of Pomeroy Studio. We specialize in sustainable design, zero energy development. I'm somewhat going through an identity crisis. I have a TV series on architecture, and so when my baby daughter kind of looks at the TV screen and actually sees me on TV, and then she looks at me in the living room, she is equally as confused as I. I am delighted to be here, and delighted that Mike invited me to give the sort of an opening sort of moderating bit. I'd like to talk about explorations into sustainable urbanism, from the surface to the sky to the sea. But beforehand, obviously we've got some amazing speakers that I'd also be liking to introduce. In order to kind of set the context, I think you've all heard of the triple bottom line. I mean, the social, the economic, the environmental, but arguably, I would say that it just doesn't go far enough in our increasingly crazy world. First of all, this is not working. It's all right. I want to try and focus on the environment. Every 3 months I go over to Venice to give lectures at Venice University, and now and again I'm actually met with Acqua Alta. What I find fascinating about Venice is that you can tell Venetians, they're the ones who are actually looking at their watch and they're going, oh, I've got 5 minutes to actually make it to this alleyway and I will have dry feet. All of the foreigners who go to Venice, they don't know Acqua Alta, and before you know it, you are walking around with very, very wet shoes. So you can almost set your watch to kind of the rising levels on water. Now, this is Piazza San Marco, the Doge's Palace, and I think this demonstrates what's happening with our cities around the world. 35 mega cities with 10 million people or over are currently in flood plains. If we think about Hurricane Sandy in New York in 2012, the cataclysmic effects of climate change gave New York an annual insurance bill of $320 billion US. Go figure. The effects, the economic effects of climate change are quite astronomical. And it's not just in New York. I mean, when you think about how it's actually affecting our daily lives, there are certain cities in India whereby the days or the hours that you work in a day are being kind of truncated in order to be able to kind of not pass out from the heat. There is an incredible amount of transmigration as we're moving to higher climes to try and escape the heat and to embed ourselves with greenery to try and help reduce ambient temperatures. So bear in mind that here we may see Miami with those wonderful seafront condominiums today, but by 2050, you potentially might be saying goodbye to the ground floor. And why is it that we still somehow find ourselves trying to recreate patterns in the West in terms of urbanization and urbanism, and think that we can actually cookie cutter and apply elsewhere? The tall building is not necessarily the panacea. The tall building is not necessarily our kind of answer to urbanization. There are other ways that we can be urbanizing. There are other ways that we can be creating density. I want to ask you guys a question, and I want to see a show of hands, and please don't be shy, not like my Asian university students. If I was to compare Paris and Hong Kong, I want to see the show of hands who thinks that Haussmann's Paris of 8 stories is more dense than, say, 20-story Hong Kong, 20-story Kowloon. Who thinks Kowloon will be denser than Paris? Hands up for Kowloon. Okay. Hands up for Paris. You three are the PhD students. Congratulations. Collect your certificate at the end of this talk. What we find is that density is a matter of perception. We often assume that when we can not see sky and we see high-rise buildings, we actually kind of think that it's a lot denser. But this exercise has demonstrated that you can incredibly, find high-density developments by looking at courtyard-orientated or terraced-orientated development, as the research of Leslie Martin and Lionel March proved in Cambridge back in the 60s and 70s. Now, obviously, the cataclysmic effects of population increase has seen half the world's populations living in inner city centres from 2007, and by 2050, we're going to see 75% living in inner city centres. Where are all those social spaces going? How am I going to be able to grab a coffee with you? You know, basically, why is it that we become so reliant on Facebook and LinkedIn to socially interact? With population increase, we're looking to technology to try and socially interact in public sometimes because of spatial pressure. As we urbanize, as we see inner city migration, we're seeing spaces becoming challenged. We're seeing an increasing privatization of space. We're seeing the vanishing streets and squares in lieu of retail malls and cinemas, comfort controlled at 18 degrees centigrade. We're also seeing the negative impacts of technology. We should be using technology sparingly and using the appropriate technology for particular places. And culture. What about culture? Well, we're living in an increasingly globalized world. We're increasingly finding that our own individual cultures are being challenged by global brand. Is there a way that we should be thinking about a cultural sustainability in addition to a social sustainability? Can we think about what it means to be Chinese, Indian, Malaysian, and start to reinterpret the essence of a culture to ensure that what places we're creating is actually true and meaningful to the inhabitants? So these broad issues, these 6 parameters of sustainable design, as I call them, are some of the pressing issues that we're facing as a collective, as built environment professionals, to try and make a better urban habitat for future generations.